So ang susunod po nating speaker, the next speaker that we have in the program is Dr. Thomas Mical. Dr. Thomas Mical is a professor of architectural theory. Dr. Mical has been teaching and researching globally on modern and hypermodern theories of architecture and urbanism over a long career in diverse international architecture programs. He has a master's degree or MR from Harvard, GSD on sci-fi urbanism, and a PhD from Georgia Tech in architectural theory, philosophy, and art history. He has taught 50 design studios and has been a tenured professor in the US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. He has held fellowships at the Architectural Association in UK, London, School of Economics in UK, and DAAD or DAAD and Fulbright in Germany. So for everyone's information, Dr. Mical is currently based in India right now. No? So naka sort of he is our important expert. So Dr. Mical, if you are ready to present. And welcome to our Bahay Kubo Paradigm program.
Thank you so much, Johnny, and it's good to see everyone again. I feel like I know everyone, but also I haven't actually been to Manila since the pandemic, so I also noticed that distance as well. I've got a small little presentation, but I've been asked to talk about global communities, and I also want to tie it to some of the value systems that are operating through this project and this initiative, which I've been happy to participate in probably from the beginning. So for those of you that are watching, I'm very happy to be here. And just to let you know, Cecilia asked me if I could do a presentation. And I said, I don't usually use the alarm clock on Sunday mornings because it's 8:30 in the morning here. And I said, I don't usually go online on Sundays, but since you asked nicely, I will come and join in the festivities. So that's how important this initiative is to me. If I can, I'm going to try to share a screen, if that's all right.
Okay. I think I'll have to stop my presentation first before you can share yours.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. I think everyone should be able to see mine. I've just got a pop-up. We're good? Okay. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the global practices and ideas that are circulating around the world, having to do with this prospect of landscape, urbanism, health, and particularly in the case of the Philippines, a lot of the questions that are being explored, not through theory perhaps, but primarily through practice, which is where the action is right now. This is a map of the world. And if you look at this map very closely, you'll notice that it's been deliberately distorted by geographers to show not the square footage of each of the countries, but to show their relative size based on population. You may know this geographical anomaly, but if you draw a circle and go around India, China, out past Japan, Philippines, Indonesia, and back around India, that takes up about 10% of the Earth's surface, but it holds 50% of the Earth's population. So you guys are actually in the center of an incredibly sophisticated range of human and environmental geographies. And you can see from this map, if you look very closely, some of the places I've been a professor before, like Canada, Australia, New Zealand, they almost disappear because their populations are small and diminishing, and you can see. But the future and all of the wicked problems and all the lively solutions to these wicked problems are most likely to be located within this circle of Asia. We also know, and this has been fascinating for me to learn, that the Philippines is a construct composed of particular oceanic ecologies and natural topographies and a vast range of everything from cuisines to clothing styles to methods of construction and even plantings. And so I think understanding the sophistication of identity and the importance of maintaining in an era of globalization the attention to the particular, to the local, not as a form of geopolitical resistance, perhaps, but attending to those things that were conventional knowledge in the grandparents or earlier generations, and in some cases, bringing that knowledge back in the face of what is increasingly homogenized and automated approaches towards everything from food service to entertainment. And that's not saying to go back to the so-called good old days, but to maintain a certain respect for the embodied knowledge and embodied practical wisdom that developed over many centuries about how to do everything from singing to maintaining a well-balanced garden. I want to also point out that in the prospect of thinking about global practices of landscape, or even just understanding or conceptualizing nature, nature itself is not just alive, but constantly moving. In many ways, any attempt to represent it has a certain limitation. You're looking at a geographical map of the Mississippi River in the United States. 41% of the watershed of the US flows through this river and goes down to one narrow little base in Louisiana before it goes to the Gulf of Mexico. So it's a particularly fragile but robust also system. And this is a geographical map tracing the boundaries of the Mississippi River over 100 years, done by the US Geological Survey, and superimposed. So what this shows us is even the idea of the Mississippi River is itself, at play and alive. It doesn't really respect boundaries. It's something that is constantly moving, changing, evolving, distributing rocks and adjusting to other systems in and around its proximity and the things that touch it. So everything from the Arctic temperatures to the fish in the Gulf of Mexico have a strong influence on these natural systems. And so we're starting to recognize in a lot of places the interconnectedness of things. Not just the interconnectedness of objects and spaces and people, but the invisible systems that actually hold them together. And that's why projects like the one that you guys are working on are actually quite important, because it asks us to combine knowledge systems and to combine expertise in ways that might not have been tried before. Instead of having only engineers solve something as an engineering problem, to think about what does it mean in terms of social impact? What does it have to do with spiritualism? What does it have to do with our understanding of ecologies? How does it participate in building mental health and physical health in a positive way? A lot of these questions are starting to come back now, and some people have used the pandemic as an opportunity to rethink some practices as well. This is an example of a redesign of part of New York by the late Michael Sorkin, where he tried to take a more biological approach towards urbanism, to move away from, say, the stratified grid of real estate and property values, thinking of the city as a spreadsheet with cells to be filled in terms of profit and loss, and to rethink it in terms of flows, to rethink about how a forest might grow, or how grasslands or a wetlands area might evolve over time, and to construct a hypothetical urbanism where you can see the flow of buildings, circulation systems, water systems, landscape systems, each of them integrated, and in some ways creating a type of artificial biodiversity for urban environments, which we know is the crucial component for the survival of any of the species within an ecosystem. It's diversity, and this is a very important point, it's diversity that guarantees sustainability, not homogeneity. And so finding systems and finding processes, welcoming diversity at every level, whether it's diversity of language, diversity of religions, diversity of ecosystems, diversity of knowledge structures, that's actually a very, very powerful way to develop sustainable practices. And it has to do with inclusion, it has to do with welcoming, but it also has to do something also with the idea of health. This is a cute little map. It's a bit dated, but I thought I would show it. This is a map of the internet showing the volume or flow of communication and messages across the world. So if you remember the earlier map I showed, based on population, you can see that there's a skewing here, that the population center does not map onto the flow of information. So in the same way that there are economically disadvantaged regions in globalization, there are also data deprived regions, as well as, if you can think about it, health deprived regions. We've noticed also, particularly around, say, the politics of the vaccines. And so this is important to understand too, that globalization or anything that has to do with global thinking often has a particular inflection at the local or at the micro scale. And the micro scale itself will also have forms of being, forms of living, and value systems that could feed up into more global practices. So one way to think about that is to say that things that might work in New York may not work in Manila. We know that perhaps intuitively. But the converse of that, the things that work in Manila might work in New York, is something that is also worthwhile exploring too. So if we understand that ethic, it is possible to, even something simple as tending to your own garden could have national and international implications if you come up with systems or approaches or really holistic solutions that could be applied in other places too. So in some sense, we're all potentially physical, social, emotional, or intellectual gardeners, but we can also share best practices and think about how that could permeate up into larger systems and to larger forms of cooperation. The question of the multitude as a concern, the increasing growth of human population in a finite Earth with finite resources is coming to a pretty unstable situation right now because of the climate crisis as well, which has exacerbated this. Cities, for example, here in India that occasionally would have flooding are now spending a lot of time submerged. And this has affected everything from supply chains to the scores of children in school and their ability to study and learn. And so the question of the multitude, which in the case of the Philippines is quite interesting because Manila in particular has high density, but it's also one of the youngest cities demographically too. And that means all of the future opportunities for thinking through these situations and for coming up with new forms of diversity and new forms of inclusion in terms of social practice, urban practice, even culinary practice. I think that, the future is certainly located in the proximity of the Philippines for thinking through forms of, I guess, togetherness, but also forms of sharing. And gardens and parks and social spaces and public spaces, even just playing with your friends in the street is a quintessential, almost primeval form of being human. Those things actually have incredible significance in a time of people's disappearance into screens and into their own individual bubbles. So the idea of the multitude and the idea that there's growth happening that itself might not be sustainable asks us to come up with new practices, but it also gives us an opportunity to start to think and dream about other ways of being together. Just a couple of examples from the design field. Some student thesis projects from Rensselaer Polytechnic, where I taught in New York. This is a Bachelor of Architecture thesis students' proposal to use advanced technology from NASA to clear a brownfield, a contaminated site in the United States, and to bring back the native grasses into an area that had been damaged ecologically. It's a attempt at something that's called repair culture. The idea that designing is not simply about creating commodities or processes that generate revenue, but a deeper ethics of care in design processes where repairing and maintaining systems, but also producing non-financial, a social good, is also seen as an important part of the designer's responsibility. Different students, same semester, trying to protect a very fragile wetland outside of the harbor at Boston. And his approach was actually to develop an organic system, kind of like a bandage, that would allow plants and animals to move through it, but also protect the environment from human movement and from ship and vehicle movement until it could heal. And here you can see it was about bringing back some native wildlife too. And they found that even in attempts to rewild different ecosystems by just bringing back a certain species or allowing a certain flower to grow that had been eliminated from the environment, brings a whole host of cascading effects. The bees will come, the other animals will come, and the systems start to rebalance themselves too. Now, just in the brief time I have left, because I realize I'm the last speaker before lunch, which is always the most dangerous position to talk in, I'm going to talk about some of the ideas that we're currently exploring in some of the courses I'm teaching here online in India around the world. The theme, I guess, that I'm working with this year is the idea of big landscapes. And I've kind of given a hint of what that is, which is thinking about global practices and vast ecosystems and large environmental issues, but also taking it right down to almost a one-to-one fine-grained reality, taking it to the most localized and the most specific point you can, and thinking how you can operate globally while acting incredibly locally. One of the value systems I would like to propose as a return actually comes from Europe. This is, some of you may know this very well-known painting. This is one of 3 panels by Hieronymus Bosch, painted in 1500. He was a Dutch painter. And his representation, this is part of a trinity of, he's representing the Garden of Eden in this center one. And the Garden of Eden, he called it a garden of earthly delights, because what he was pointing at was in the era of the biblical prehistory, that human togetherness was integrated with nature. There was no separation of man from animal, from plant, from rocks. And that in that process, that is actually the definition of delight. And that delight can be found in that alignment, that harmony between systems that we now see after Aristotle as being separate, discrete, and autonomous. Again, diversity and inclusion is one of the messages that he's proposing in this very interesting time in the 1500s before the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation. Another value that I think we should always consider, a historical one, Ebenezer Howard's concept of the garden city. He developed it in the 19th century as a response to rapid industrialization and the decline and decay of the English countryside, which is also the agricultural basis. In his approach, and he didn't really design a city, those who are trained in landscape or urbanism might recognize these diagrams. He designed hypothetical urban complexes that would maintain a harmonious relationship to the environment, mostly through mathematics and geometry. The idea is that you would build a small town centrally organized around the central park, wrap it with rings of different housing. You would put industry and infrastructure to the periphery, away from the human habitation, and you would separate each of these satellite towns or each of these different environments with vast tracts of agricultural land. So you can see cow pastures, fruit farms. So this is the idea where the idea of the green belt came from, and this is the idea of the compact city. And this is also an idea of limited growth, that once you hit 66,000 people, according to his plans, then you'd have to start a new town somewhere else. So it was an ahistorical attempt to represent almost a balancing system, so that urbanism and infrastructure were kept in proper relationship and subordinate to the much more necessary integrated green spaces and blue spaces of the environment. We can see an example of the City Beautiful movement, as it came to be called, in the first landscape architect in the United States, Frederick Law Olmsted. And this is Central Park. Those of you who've been to New York or seen films about New York, this is based on a tradition of the English picturesque garden. So the idea is that you design a natural environment that's actually artificial, but you do it in such a way that it has cultural institutions, a lot of free spaces, and it's designed with the idea of meandering or rambling. It is not a strong axial or imperial type of organization. It's the idea of the gentle and playful discovery of artificial versions of natural environments. So some of the different ecosystems and some of the different landscapes across the United States, both real and mythical, are incorporated and fused together into this environment that is still well loved and well protected by people. It's become such a dominant part of the city that anyone that dares to propose development in it is usually shot down, and even the buildings that surround Central Park. It's also quite significant in terms of the water systems and the water security for the island of Manhattan. And it serves a variety of different cultural functions, very few of which can be ascribed to have financial values. So this is the idea of the public realm and the idea of the commons, and particularly in this democratic model, open and accessible. anyone can access Central Park at any time, and most of it's safe most of the time. And people will take little pieces of it and make it their own private garden and describe it as their home away from home, or their island, or their refuge. So creating environments that are this well respected and integrated with people's lives is a type of value system that the City Beautiful movement sought to achieve, and which is possible even in the smallest of spaces in the Philippines. Another aspect of the coursework that we're teaching, and I'm working with different universities and different disciplines, is the idea of thinking in systems. When you are working across disciplines, in the same way if you're working across different cultures, there'll be everything from miscommunications to drastic misunderstandings of scale or operations. So one of the ways that we try to encourage students and practitioners to work is to think in systems, to think of things like the flow of water as a system, the flow of people as a system, the flow of air as a system, ideas about where different construction could be located, where sacred space is and how it's protected, where heritage is allowed to flourish. All of these things, when they're understood in terms of being systems, and that means connected to other similar and like things, allows us to operate in the design fields through a technique called diagrams. Here you can see it's like musical notation. This makes sense to designers, perhaps not so much to other people, but it's thinking about the different systems that go into play. And if you can think about it in terms of your own house or your own garden, there's spaces for private people, there's spaces for public people, there's spaces for environmental free play, there's spaces that are heavily constrained, there's spaces that change over time, and there's spaces that stay the same. So if we can think about even in terms of the politics of the kitchen, and who's allowed to cook, and who's allowed to learn, and who's allowed to serve, and who decides when what you eat, all of those little micropolitics also play into understanding built environment, landscape, and gardening too. And to accommodate people, to welcome them, but still keep the traditional knowledge systems in place is one of the fundamental challenges, I think, of contemporary times, where everything can be easily automated or downloaded or purchased and implemented and then discarded. So thinking in systems also allows you to communicate and work with other people, and you can change one part without having to change everything. So it's a very powerful tool, and it's very easy to learn how to think in systems once you start. And my last comment is to discuss that there are, and this is something I've noticed teaching around the world, there is even pressure in public spaces and parks and gardens to use species that are imported from other places. In Australia and New Zealand, when I was there, they have very strict biosecurity laws, to the point where a colleague of mine who accidentally brought a pear back from Canada got fined $250, and then they incinerated the pear because it might have invasive microbes that the local plants can't resist. As a consequence of that, there's a lot of thinking in those highly fragile environments and protected environments about what species exist and have existed. Also, there's a repair and preservation culture. I have a colleague I've met here who is going around India and collecting spices and plants used for herbs that are on the endangered list, and trying to revive not endangered species of animals, but endangered species of different types of peppers and herbs for future cooking, so that the cuisines don't disappear, in the same way that language preservation. So there's something about not nationalism per se, but about respect for what has worked, and for these hard and soft machines that we call the city, and to accommodate, and this is from a project that was done, I think in 2014 in the Philippines. I forgot the name of the architect, but what they're showing are some of the species that were laid out as part of the design project, trying to incorporate hopefully just the local materials and the local species too. So I would say one of the important things to think about when you're designing is to sustain, revive, or increase the types of native species in the prospect, because they've already demonstrated that they can work in the environment. And in many ways, even the subtle changes that happen over time within a city, within a garden, within a kitchen, there's still a persistence and a consistency to those things that have always been there. And I will stop my presentation at that point. So if everyone's still with us. So I guess I don't have a single message other than The global situation, particularly in the pandemic, has become quite complex and stressful, and people have suffered a great deal, either personal loss, job loss. Universities have suffered, a lot of industries have suffered, but at the same time, there's still, with the people I work with, and hopefully everyone here, there's still optimism, there's still hope. There's always that belief that there's one more thing we can try, there's one more thing we can do. And as a consequence of that, I would encourage you not to go for global solutions. It's important to be aware of them, and it's important to look globally, but also to be very, very conscious, as many of my colleagues are at the University of Santo Tomas, be very, very conscious of what is already in place and is already working and may have been working for centuries, and that doesn't need to be replaced with something that's new. In some cases, it's actually more ethical to be respectful for what already works and to be attentive to it. So maybe the secret is not to jump on the newest fad or the latest upgrade, but actually just develop a sensitivity and awareness of what's around you and become much more attentive to what could work. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. That was a very good talk about the global communities and your parting message on looking at what is already in place and what we have locally that we can harness on to build on for future communities to thrive on. Johnny?
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Thomas. Yung pala, I always say that to my students as well, that design is something that we breathe and live in. So we really need this design, new ideas, new theories, so that we can somewhat put color into our very bland life, very bland existence. So thank you for that input, and we appreciate uh, a different perspective, no, in injected into our design, into this project as well. And I think, yeah, our participants will appreciate the input. Okay. So if I think, do we have questions? Meron pa ba tayong mga tanong sa ating mga speaker or sa ating mga experts? As I was telling them a while ago, Dr. Thomas, we are lucky that we are in this project guided by our experts. We have our agriculturist, Arleen, Valera, and then of course you, and then of course the Philippine Association of Landscape Architects, all collaborating together with, of course, with their own brand of expertise and specializations. So having said that, I think we are going now for a break. If we have no more things to discuss, Kap, may tanong po ba kayo? May gusto kayong i-clarify?
Wala po, okay lang.
Wala na po. Architect Cecil, may ipapahabol ka pa ba?
There are no questions for me. They well presented their views and we appreciate them for sharing their time.
Okay. So tingin ko po, magkakaroon na tayo ng ating lunch break and then babalik po tayo ng alauna ng hapon.
We'll have picture taking first.
Ayaw
Paki-open
nga
po
pala.
cameras.
Okay, so ayun, magpi-picture taking po tayo. So kung pwede pong i-on lahat ng ating mga cameras para makasama tayo doon sa picture taking.
And Johnny, if you can stop presenting first.
Yes, yes, please. Good. Ayun.
One, two, three. Kagawad Des and Kagawad Joffy, can you open your cameras, please? Sige, another one. Kagawad Cat, pwede pong pa-open ang camera. Sige po. Let's have another shot. 1, 2, 3. Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay, so thank you very much, everyone. And yun, hope to see you again this afternoon at 1 p.m. Okay, have a hearty lunch. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Mr. Valera. And
Yeah,
Kap,
thank you very much also.
Kap, thank you po.
Sa susunod, pagkatapos ng lunch, gulay na kakanin natin. Sige, sige.
I
Okay,
think they're
thank you.
back. Let's have a photo again. They've opened all their cameras.
Okay.
Take another shot. Is everyone ready? 1, 2, 3, smile. Okay, let's take another one. Let's all say Bahay Kubo.
Bye, Kubo.
1, 2, 3, Bahay Kubo. Okay, thank you. We'll see you all
Okay.
back at 1 p.m. Thank you, Thomas, for gracing us today. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, thank you. Sige. So I'll be back at 1 o'clock.
Apo.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Mag-leave ka na.